soon as I can. Right, so I think it's currently recording. Here we go. There. Right, it's currently recording. We're now going live. There we go. Right. There we go. Okay, let's start then. Okay. So, hello and welcome to the oh, wait. No. Hang on. Yeah, I forgot. That was nearly. I put the cover on the camera.
What did you do? Put the cover on.
There we go.
Oh, I put the cover on.
For a second then, that would have been disaster. Right. Okay. There. Okay. Should be good. Right. Hello and welcome to the Bible School show, where we're just hoping in this one little hour to go deeper into this Christian faith that we're a part of. And we're hoping to do that through sections on theology, where we're hoping to change our minds and hearts to live this way that Jesus wants us to. We've got church history, where we're just looking at these examples of Christians down through history who followed this example of Christ, took it to heart and lived that way, and incredible things happen. And then also Bible study, because what better way to know this God than to listen to his very words. Now, just to begin and open up, I just wanted to read, because we're in this Advent season getting ready for Christmas, the Word becoming flesh. We read earlier in our service today from Psalm 107. And it's just all about how when we're in trouble, we need to be calling on the Lord. And then there was this particular verse which I thought I might just read, these two verses. Psalm 107, verses 18 to 20. I'll read that. So it's talking about all the foolish ways and things we trust in. So, they, all these fools, they loathed all food and drew near the gates of death. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. Here's the cool bit, verse 20. He sent out his word and healed them. He rescued them from the grave. That, right in those songs, they're singing about this word of God that's going to save us from death, to heal us. It's an incredible little passage, and I just wanted to cover it. Jesus is this promised help that the Father is sending, always. Right, let's just cover our first frameworks day. So we're going to do day 11. Jesus is not just part of the picture. Now, because Dad can't be here just for this week and the next week, we've got some recordings. So we've still got these videos and content. Let's listen to them together. Right.
Well, welcome to study 11 of our Foundations course in this Bible School show. And the title for this one is that Jesus is not just part of the picture. He's not part of the picture. So it kind of follows on from our last study that this is so important, particularly in our day and age, that what we can't do is think, well, Jesus is important, or he's an important part of the big picture. Very easy to do that, to believe that we can see this big picture of reality, the universe, and all sorts of things to do with the universe and life and beings and things like that. That we might say, well, part of that picture is Jesus. Some people would say part, some would say it's a big part. But any attempt is a big problem to what we thought about last week. But it's a bigger. He's not. We thought about that he has to be the star sort that's going to handle him. The starting point is not just that he's the introduction to theology, introduction to truth, and then after it, onto a bigger picture without him, and it's the doorman into some bigger thing, so that you have to go in through Jesus, but then you're into something bigger than Jesus. No, not that. He's not a piece in the big jigsaw. If we think about that jigsaw, he's a piece or loads of pieces, or a huge piece or something. The picture that all the pieces connect. Pieces in reality, what you see is Jesus, or it's his view of reality is that thing, and everything in the universe, all the little pictures and perspectives and aspects and all that, all of them fit within this enormous cosmic reality of the eternal Son. The Word, the cosmic Christ. See, if Jesus is the starting point, then, as we saw in the last study, the finishing point as well, when we start with him and aiming for him, because he's like at the beginning of it all and brings us into this big reality. But in that, we're always keeping our eye on him, because he's the one who's drawing us forward into an ever bigger understanding of the heavens and the earth and ourselves and everything. So he's behind us, ahead of us, the end goal. There's nothing beyond him. We're always stretching towards him. The biggest reality there is, and as Colossians 2 verse 9 says, all the fullness of bodily form. So it's not just everything that the universe is in, but even the maximum of what God is in. Now, the reason that's important in the Colossian church, and this is why that little letter to the Colossians is so important on having this big view of Jesus, busting him out of just being a part in a compartment, and then making sure he is the big container in which all the parts fit. So in the Colossians, yeah, they did trust in Jesus, but it's as if they also trusted in lots of other things. There were lots of things that they believed were part of the picture of reality, and Jesus was the important part, maybe the most important part by far, but there were other things they were also into that they believed were necessary to come alongside Jesus in order to get reality. So in Colossians 2 verses 16 to 19, Paul tells them not to think about diet, calendar issues, time management, angels, self-improvement programs, philosophies, all kinds of the things that we do get into, and time and the year and calendar issues, beings, and all the kinds of self-improvement things and philosophy. So Paul, don't bother with all those things, and like as if they are realities, and all of them together form the. Like, Jesus is the big reality. If you focus on him and trying to be shown by him, you will have the biggest possible view of reality, and all these other things, how the year is, how to address the problems in ourselves, and common. All these things are found in Jesus, not outside of Jesus, not supplements to Jesus. So you could read 16 to 19 to get that. Judged by what you eat or drink, or with regard to religious festivals, New Year's, Sabbath days, all these calendar events and religious festivals. These things are just shadows of things to come. The reality, however, in Christ. Notice that. And then keep reading all the way down to 19. So that's our study. That back then, to be things that were very important, that were all of it like the ancient law of Moses. Lots of people. There's the law of Moses. You need of those things to have the full picture. And Paul's like, no, the ancient law of Moses is all about. He is, if you understand Jesus, that, all that ancient law of Moses, him. It's not alongside him. He's the reality of it all. The sorts of things that we have, we might believe in psychology or theories and all sorts of things that we go, well, he's good for some things in life, things or something, or eternal things. But we need other things in order to get the full picture of reality. If we ever find ourselves thinking like that or talking like that, we need to stop and say, how Jesus, the big picture. Nothing reality. And our ancestors who so much, they were the ones who did give this massive view of civilization and science and literature and everything. All aspects of reality come out more fully and deeply when we see how Jesus.
Fantastic. Yeah. Right, so just before we have our next, we're just going to have our church history segment, our first one, which is on the Apostle James. Is that right? Yep. Okay. So, the Apostle James, there's actually two Apostle Jameses out there. The greater, or, by greater, that word just kind of means big, so he's older and he's probably taller as well. This particular James, Big Jim, is kind of what his name means. And he's the son of Zebedee, of course, John's brother. And so there's a lot we can know about him from John's Gospel and from Acts, because we know a lot about John. So we know John, he's well known to the high priest, John 18:15, and he has the right to enter the temple high priest's palace. So that means he seems quite closely related to the high priest. We see in the Gospels that Zebedee is this very wealthy fisherman. And he has many servants and many ships. And then Salome is among the women who support alongside like Joanna. So from all of this, that Zebedee, for his elder son James, were nobles. And he's often in military garb, because nobles in the ancient world, that's like a fighter thing, he's a knight depicted as, it's an idea. And they say James was a very large man with a clear, booming voice, and sinners who heard his teaching were said to tremble with fear if they only had an ounce of conscience. And there's this one story where Salih is this Arab noble, and he flees Arabia for Galilee during Jesus' ministry. And he has these twin sons, Ibn Athar, who was born blind, and Ibn al-Radi, who was born deaf. And the twins grew up with the names Ctesiphon and Cecil, respectively. And when Salih heard about Jesus, he took his sons to Jesus. And then when Jesus healed them, he made James their godfather, and they later travelled with James on his missionary journeys. So Acts mentions James at the beginning of his ministry in Acts 6:2. I think that's kind of the last mention for a bit, and then it picks up right at the end of his ministry in Acts 12:2. But he isn't in Jerusalem between those chapters, so it's like, where did he go? Well, tradition says he went to Tyre in Lebanon, and he caught a ship heading west in 35 AD. He landed on the island of Sardinia, and then on the Tyrian colony of in Spain. He destroyed the idol of Hercules and rededicated that temple about what's now Andalusia. In Granada, he preached in a synagogue, and it was split between people who heard about Jesus before, and they're very excited to see one of Jesus' apostles, and there were these other people who hated Christ. And then they try to shout James down then when he starts preaching, but his amazing booming voice, he's just steams, so everyone gets to hear his whole sermon. Plot in, and then one day they pounce on him and they drag him outside the city. They're going to kill him, and just as they're about to decapitate him, angels from heaven and brought James to safety. And then James baptized many, and loads of people sort of raised, and he leaves Cecil as the first bishop of this place. He goes on to another city called Bercha, and he leaves Ctesiphon, Cecil's twin brother, as bishop there. And then he goes along the eastern coast. He reaches Zaragoza. And then he made no converts for quite a while until January AD 40, when the Lord transported Mary, they say, to Spain, like he transports Philip to Azotus in Acts 8:40. Like the Spirit's just able to move people wherever they need to be instantly. And so this miracle alone, people just see this woman, Mary, and with Mary's help, James is able to establish this strong church. And then he leaves it under the care of Saints Athanasius and Theodore. Not the Athanasius we've talked about before, this is a much earlier one. So then he goes to Portugal, and then he goes, this is a really fun story, where he goes to Ratis, which is the city or town in Portugal, and he stumbles across this funeral procession when he arrives. And it's for this guy called Peter, and they explain, he's a very holy man, and he loved the Lord. And so James is like, that's brilliant, I'll just bring him back to life then, he can be bishop, this is great, because they convince him so much how great he is. He's like, yeah, we can't lose a guy like that, let's bring him back. And so he's bishop of Ratis. And so after that, several Spanish chronicles say James preached in Britain, which is quite cool. And I'm going to butcher this name, but Pierre-Francois Xavier de Charlevoix, I've definitely butchered that. But anyway, this guy says James in Canada and the Caribbean, from these ancient reports of him going to the utmost west. So then James goes back to Jerusalem. He's arrested, and he preaches the gospel in his defense, showing how Jesus is the God of Abraham and all the Old Testament. They are baptized by him. He told his servant Josiah to put a rope around James and take him to the place of execution. On the way, though, he kills this person with palsy, and so the servant Josiah, he believes as well. And James uses his last drink of water to baptize this guy who's going to execute him, and then they end up beheaded together. So that's everything I've got with James. That's great. Fantastic, Apostle James. Right. Look at later in our second one, is that right as well? Right. That would be awesome. So our next Frameworks Day is just on Jesus creating the universe. So let me just play the vid and we'll watch together.
We're in study 12 of our theology section of our Bible school show. And the title for study 12 is Jesus creating the universe. That we've got a little sequence going that we said the only system of thought that Jesus has to start with him. Then we part of the picture, he is the big picture, and now we're really sort of going to the root of it all to say, well, the reason for all of that is the reason that everything makes sense of Jesus, and we don't need anything other than him to make sense of everything. The reason that's true, it's not just that we say, well, I think that's true, and so on. It's not just the reason in the universe makes sense when we have Jesus Jesus at the centre of our vision? It's because he made the universe. And he holds the universe together. It all makes sense. Now, in our next study, we're going to see the way he holds it all together. Study 12, we're going to just notice how, right the way through the whole Bible, it's that Jesus, God the Son, God the Word, made the universe. And then let's just appreciate what that means. Those that think about the fact that there were people going around with him for 3 years or so in the gospel. They watched the way he behaved and the things he did, and how human being, this man, in some way, he created the universe. Was a close friend of Jesus of Nazareth, and John's biography in 1 verses 1 to 10, and if you read that, we often read it at Christmas. In the beginning was the Word, and that's Jesus he's talking about. Word, that because on the very first page of the Bible, to 1, when Moses is talking about the creation of the universe, he describes how God, through his Word, made everything in the heavens and the earth through his Word. And that Word in Genesis 3, that voice of God, comes down. Genesis, the Word of the Lord comes to talk to Abraham, and it's the sky with all the countless stars and things. So even in the book of Genesis, it's obvious that there is this person, the Word. And on page 1 of the Bible, God creates the heavens and the earth with his Word, with this person who is the Word of God. And so John, who's just spent those years living with Jesus, working with him, walking around that and John's like, yeah, this guy who we spent time with, he obviously made the universe. And the universe obeyed him. He could just tell the weather what to do, and he wouldn't just pack lunch and just keep breaking it up and giving it out. And it's as if the entire universe was utterly obedient to him and would do whatever he said. And just the way he behaved and what he said, they were like, this obviously is that Word of God that Moses spoke about on the first page of the Bible. Now that's really important, because one person, Jesus, who is born into this family in Nazareth, and so I suppose he isn't Jesus of Nazareth on page 1 of the Bible, and lives at Nazareth, so Jesus of Nazareth, that person, that Jesus, what didn't start to exist or start to do things, rather, before first began, he's there. He's the one who started the word that we have as that we the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, as it is in John chapter 1. So that Word, it's the word logos, logic. He's the logic of the universe because he made it. So put it this way, in the sort of early 4th century, one of the key questions people were saying is, well, Jesus is divine. There must have been a time when he didn't yet exist. Like some of course, okay, maybe he was there at the beginning of the universe. Before the beginning of the universe, surely he didn't exist then. But got together and they were like, no, hang on. Like the Bible says, he's always been. Never been a time when the Son wasn't there. He was there before anything was created. He was always there, the Son of the Father with the Spirit. So we see that in Genesis chapter 1. The Father initiated the work of creation. He willed it and he planned it all. But it's Jesus, the craftsman. Proverbs chapter 8 calls him that. That he's the one who put it all together. And so that's why it's so important to always remember that when just an important man ago, he is, before he became one of us, he had always existed. The universe, using the instructions of the Father in the power of the Spirit. And this little bit from Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 to 16. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He's the visible form. He is God presented to us visibly. So we've seen God. If you're ever reading through the Bible and it says that somebody sees God, and that happens quite a lot in a see God or see the Lord, or all these different places, and you'll see it happens quite often. So whenever anyone sees it, this is saying Jesus is the visible form of being presented. It's there in Colossians 1 verse 15. But it says that he's the firstborn over all creation. And it's not that he's the first in the creation. No, firstborn in the Bible, you'll see a firstborn person is the one who inherits everything. So it's saying that he is the of God, and he gets to inherit everything in the universe. It all belongs to him. Because, Colossians 1:16, in him all things were created, for everything in heaven and on earth, all the powers and authorities and all the complete universe, all of it, it says, has been created by Jesus and for him. It's all for him. So in this little study, what we're trying to do is just step back and realize that all these things we see Jesus, why he has to be the starting point of our thought, why he has to be the big picture of everything. The reason for that is the creator of the universe. He made it all, so he knows it all.
Jesus being not just a part of the picture, but being the picture, and the guy who made the picture in the first place. He's the, or I think one of the phrases we liked as well, and the crucified. I love that. But this idea that he created everything and he's the a great little message about how important this creation. Right, so we're going to have our John, and of course PJ's going to explain what this. Let's talk about John.
Okay.
So the Apostle John, he's James' brother. So all of that background goes for him as well. And he first appears with the Apostle Andrew living in the wilderness with the prophet John. And it's so 2 disciples. Stuck around the longest, being the only one of the 12 that watched trial and crucifixion. He was chosen to look after Mary, the mother of God, probably as a result of all. He also trained Ignatius of Antioch, the child of Matthew 18 that Jesus placed amongst the disciples. He went to Ephesus at some point, and he bought a house outside the city, so Mary. And from Ephesus, he founded the churches of Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Laodicea, and many other cities in that kind of region. And when Herod Agrippa died in 44 AD, John returned to 50 AD when Paul sees him in the Council of Jerusalem. And then the little boy Ignatius from Matthew 18, he wants at Antioch and encourage the church there. And he was saying he never really got to know Mary that well, and he'd really like some of their encouragement. He had to write two. John didn't respond to. He ends up writing another one to Mary, and she does actually respond. She says, "Of course, John comes as well. We're going to Antioch. Don't worry." It's a lovely letter. You can read it. It's lack of letters, and then Mary's response, all of that. So then in Antioch, Luke were old friends, and of course she helps Luke write his gospel, which is quite happened. And then Mary resolved to visit Lazarus in Cyprus, but on the way she and John were swept off course by a storm, and they landed on Mount Athos. These locals, they made the mountain a monastic community, and that dedicated an entire kind of peninsula. And then after going, went along the road to China, and then back to Ephesus. And then at some point, Mary there, she goes to be with Jesus, and then John's left alone. And then the bishops, archbishops, and apostles gathered together in Ephesus to deal with the heretics. And they brought the Gospels and letters written by the other apostles, and they asked John to see what was left out. And he found it very odd that none of the Gospels started actually at the beginning. That's what the accounts say. He was like, oh, that's really weird. And he pointed out that there were some foolish false teachers that claimed Jesus' birth was the beginning of Jesus' life. Because dealing with Matthew, it's like, here's the beginning of Jesus. He doesn't mean beginning, you know. That's obviously on John's mind. So then after 3 days of fasting and prayer, Andrew stands up and says John should write down this biography. John and his helpers start work. And then, here's a great story. Rain. He gets all annoyed. He says, can't you see that I'm writing? He shouts at the sky. Clouds disperse. And medieval writers of their own time, it had never rained on that spot. And then after 40 more days of prayer and fasting, John was the word. And then the apostle Prochorus, he's like, quick, let's write that down. And so there's loads of icons you can see. He's like, better get that down. Enarche, you see that in the icon. So they start the gospel with that, and they're working together for a while. And Papias, he's another one of John's disciples. He makes sure John in a double John 8. So it all gets included, they work together. In the year 92, John gets arrested, he gets taken to Rome, to the emperor. It decides to throw him in a boiling vat of oil. But he is like refreshed, like he's just taken a bath, and perfectly alive, of course. And so everyone in the arena believes in Christ. And so in the end, they can't kill John, so they have to exile him to Patmos, and there he has his revelation, and then he gets freed by the good Emperor Nerva. And then one day, John told them to prepare a tomb for him and to cover him with a shroud. And then when they returned the next day to mourn over, they found the tomb completely empty. And so, and what this particular medieval icon is, it's King Edward the Confessor. I think it's. And he goes. So what he does, he's always dedicated to John the Apostle. He always wants to follow in his footsteps. And then one day he's setting up this church, St. John the Evangelist. And then this beggar comes along, and he's like, "Oh, do you have anything to spare?" And he just a ring, which is useless. It's worth millions of pounds, and he just doesn't know what his right hand's doing, sort of thing. And then this character goes along to Jerusalem, and there give this ring to the king, and he gives a letter. And then the next day, these people pilgrims, they wake up and they're all away in England, and so so they rush to him, give him the letter, and then the letter, of course, explains Apostle John, and then he says, "You've done amazingly. I think, you've done a great job. I'm really proud that you're inspired by my example and all that." And then he holds his ring there, like it's his proudest kind of thing. He holds it like that. And I think you can see on his side, we can see that. Anyway, that's that story of John. Loads of stories about what he's been up to.
Just for one second. Who is it? The Confessor, Edward the Confessor. Who actually gives the ring?
John gives the ring to Edward there. Yeah. That's him.
Edward the Confessor gives his ring to John.
Yeah, I see.
The Confessor gives the ring to John.
Yeah.
And then later, John. Awesome. Thank you. Right. So we're now going to have a look at our Bible study, and we're currently going through Exodus. Now, just as we're kind of picking up at chapter 7, I just wanted to quickly just summarise a little bit of what we covered last week, because a lot had happened. I just wanted to quickly, last week, I just did that thing where I wanted to cover the last bit of chapter 4, where this amazing thing happens, where Moses and Aaron, the Lord, as he sets them up, he wants Moses to be this head, like this king, and he wants Moses to give his words to Aaron, and Aaron will do the saving. Aaron will go and do the speaking and the So that's a key point. Because over this story, the Exodus story, Moses starts to look like the father. To have a veil, people can't see his face. And then Aaron as well starts to look a little bit like Jesus. Aaron gets to do all these things that is a promise of what Jesus will do. And then I did also mention last week how some of these memories back to the Exodus, it talks about how Moses, Aaron and Miriam, so those three were leading Israel. And we saw in chapter this, through the Son, in the fire, the power of the Spirit, this work of three to save the church. So the Lord, of course, commissions 3 leaders, and he wants each one to represent an aspect of how God saves. So that's, anyway, just looking a bit at chapter 4. Then, chapter 5, we have this aspect where Moses first approaches Pharaoh and gives him this chance, the first warning, but actually it's an offer for Pharaoh to join in this rescue plan. Moses in chapter 5 starts the journey, goes up to Pharaoh and asks to let the people go. Now the reason why this is so kind of key, this invitation, is the previous Pharaoh, well, maybe there's a few previous Pharaohs, but the Pharaoh that's in Genesis, Jacob has a funeral for his wife and all the church is mourning her. What's amazing is Pharaoh joins in. He wants to be a part of this church activity, he wants to be a part of this exodus they have. So the point is, Pharaoh, a previous one, already joined. He, in Genesis, the reason Pharaoh loves Joseph and appoints him to be ruler is because he knows the Lord is with Joseph. So this moment when Moses goes to Pharaoh saying to the Lord, really, there's a way in which you're meant to, are you going to listen to the Lord, love him, as the previous Pharaoh did, as you always used to? And then this Pharaoh let him down. This Pharaoh didn't listen to the Lord God as his previous, this great Pharaoh that helped Joseph. So anyway, chapter 5 is really this nice thing where the Lord's like, look, you Pharaohs were on my side before. Are you on my side? No. Right, and then chapter 6, we had a look at that. And that's where, after Moses gave this invitation to Pharaoh to join in, and Pharaoh turns it down and actually then becomes aggressive. Chapter 6, the Lord has to give this bit of encouragement to
to Moses and the church, saying, don't fret, you've only done one. There's going to be 10 more chances, or there's 10 more things we're going to have to do. This is just one. This is the first hurdle. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. And really, this big message in chapter 6. Don't worry. It's going to happen because I'm the same Lord God who made this promise to Abraham. It's the same me. Your father Abraham knew me. He trusted me. He knew this rescue would happen. So should you. Don't worry, it's going to happen. I'm the same Lord. In chapter 6, just all through, I'm the Lord. He's telling him, I'm that Lord that your father Abraham knew. It's me. It's the same promise. It's the same rescue plan. And the same rescuer. Anyway, so chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, just a quick summary on that. Right, now, we're getting into chapter 7. And notice as well, one of the reasons I wanted to just introduce this Moses and Aaron dynamic is, look at chapter 7, and we'll read through together, working through it. Chapter 7, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you. Your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. Now, hopefully we can see that. We've introduced this concept. What the Lord's wanting is Moses and Aaron to be like action figures of how the Lord's actually going to save later. This Exodus is a small event about what God's going to do for the whole world. And he wants Moses and Miriam to act the parts. They're going to show everybody how God saves. God saves by the Father speaking through Jesus in the power of the Spirit, or Moses telling Aaron what to say in this worship of Miriam, which we'll see later. Also, the prophet, right. So notice in verse 1, Aaron will be your prophet. Now, later in Exodus and Deuteronomy, Moses has to have this fantastic speech, and the Lord tells him about this speech, about how there will be the prophet coming. The prophet, and in the Gospels, I don't know if you remember, when John the Baptist shows up, they go, are you the Messiah, or are you the prophet? They know that there's this guy coming who will speak the words of God, the Saviour. This title Aaron gets, the prophet. Moses later says, yeah, Aaron was like a really good one, but hold out for the prophet. Hold out for the big one. Aaron was just an actor. Jesus is the prophet. And that we'll look at that later. But anyway, that title, it's fantastic. Now, reading on, verses 3 and 4. Now, you are to say everything I command to you, and your brother is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. 3, but I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Then, with mighty judgment, I will bring out my divisions, the Israelites. Now, just to reaffirm, we mentioned before, of the heart. In Ezekiel, it's not the Lord that's making our heart hard. Rather, he's taking out a hard heart. He wants to give us a heart of flesh. That's Ezekiel 18. And we saw again in Romans 1. It's not what that means, the Lord hardening, is more that, and actually we'll see it, for these first few plagues, it says the Pharaoh hardens his own heart. He hardens his heart. But then notice, every plague, it's like he's got to redo it. He's got to re-harden his heart. That's the key. Pharaoh is battling God in his own heart. Pharaoh is hardening it. The Lord is softening it. And what happens is, when the Lord hardens his heart, later in plague 5, I think it is, that, as Romans tells us, is the Lord stepping back. He's no longer going to
give us a soft heart. He's no longer going to keep working with our heart. Steps back. If we keep rejecting him, there comes a point where the Lord goes, all right, as you wish, I'll leave you to it. If you really want this, I'll let you have it. And that's the worst thing. But that's just to cover this hardening of the heart.
Excuse me, just for one second. Yeah, going on to about the plagues, wasn't it the seventh plague where he hardens the heart of Pharaoh?
He hardens them all from about 6 to 9.
Because there was only 7 plagues.
No, there's 10 that happen in the Exodus chapter, which we'll cover later in the chapters. And we'll cover the hardening of Pharaoh's heart.
I'll mention it after.
Right, so his heart is actually the Lord stopping softening. And we looked at that in the previous chapter. And we'll see Pharaoh hardens his own heart. He's resisting the Lord. And there comes a point where the Lord stops fighting for his heart. Right, now, quickly moving on. Verse 5, I'll just read that. Now, this is important. God is going to do all these mighty acts of judgment. I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites. He does it, verse 5, so that the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. Right, I might just cover this quickly, but this aspect that the Lord's going to do big rescue, and it's going to be a really big event. We talked about before, all the nations of the world are kind of looking at this event. When they hear of all that happens, this, like we'll see the Gibeonites later, because of this event, a whole nation joins the church. Like, okay, we heard what happened in Egypt, we're not going to make the same mistake he did, we'll join up. So that happens. But all the other nations know of this event. It's a big thing. And the reason the Lord's doing it is to try and bring people in. He wants to, we saw in Ezekiel, the Lord doesn't like killing wicked people. He wants them to be rescued with Israel, with the church. And we'll see that later. Now the reason, I just wanted to cover verse 5. He told me about this fantastic, it's the 1 Chronicles bit I might briefly mention. So, in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 18, we've got this little mention where Pharaoh's daughter has actually joined this church family. Now, whether it's the same one or a later one, the point is, Egypt, the Lord wanted this Exodus to be for everyone. Everyone who wants to be a part of church can be. And we'll see later, Pharaoh's daughter actually gets him. I'd like to think it's Moses' mum, this mother-in-law he had, where he's like, she rescued Moses and then wanted to be a part of this adventure with him. But anyway, 1 Chronicles 4:18, it just talks about this. The Lord's he actually wants Egypt to be a part of this rescue too. He first goes to Pharaoh and says, look, Pharaoh knew me, you should. And then now he's saying, actually, I want all the Egyptians, every individual, to know who I am. And we'll see later, he also wants them to join in. Okay, right. Verse 6 to 7. This is great. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. Here, Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. We always like to mention that they began ministry in their 80s. And we'll see later, I think it's Caleb, he's even older and he's killing giants. He's like rescuing, conquering territories, saving people, and he's beyond 80. And Moses as well, possibly in his hundreds, he's waging war. So anyway, it's a fun note. Right, carrying on, this staff of Aaron. Right, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then Aaron, take your staff and throw it before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. Now, so Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became. Pharaoh then summoned the wise men and sorcerers and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Now this is key. Each one threw down his staff and it became a snake, but Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. And then verse 13, yet Pharaoh's heart became hard and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. So first thing, just to get us into this, chapter 5, Moses gives a warning to Pharaoh. Be a part of this or else things are going to happen. You need to be on board with this. And then in chapter 7, verse 5, the Lord wants all the Egyptians to know they need to be a part of this. Now this staff event is really God giving a warning now to Egypt and its gods, saying, look, a war is about to start. I'm going to fight over this church. And really telling these gods of Egypt, you're not going to win. You're going to try, you're going to do little things, or you're going to do your best. You're not going to win. So really telling them to give up as well. And that's just a key that we'll be looking at. So later, because again, these magicians, they all try little things. We'll see in the plague of blood later. They also try to mimic. Moses does this incredible event. We'll look at it in a sec. And then the magicians do it. It says they try to do the same thing. And I think, was it the Prince of Egypt film? And in that, Moses does this incredible thing where all the water turns to blood, everything in pots and all that. And then the magicians in that film get like a little bowl of water and they like dab it and turn this little bowl. And Pharaoh's like, okay. And that hard. I love it because we can see that's probably not that big an exaggeration. When the staff turns into a snake and they do a similar thing, the Lord's staff is better. It beats them. So when we read that little verse, they did the same thing by their secret arts, we know it's not to the same level. God's staff was better. It beat theirs. So they might be able to do little things, but it doesn't compare to when God does it. And we'll see actually by, I believe it's the third. Yeah, that's when the magicians just suddenly step away and go, oh, actually, yeah, okay, this God's on a whole nother level. In fact, actually, well, I'll say it. In the third plague, which we'll probably cover next week, when they see this one, they go, okay, this isn't just any God. This is the creator of the heavens and the earth. So the magicians are trying, doing little things, but all of a sudden they go, oh, okay, actually, yeah, we can't compete. We can't compete. Right. And then notice at the end of chapter 7 as well, Pharaoh's heart became hard. So the Lord, although he says he hardens Pharaoh's heart, we'll see the Lord begins by trying to fight for his heart first, softening it and working with it, and Pharaoh is the one who hardens it over time. Right. These next two plagues are a bit of a group, but we're going to look at this plague of blood first. Now, I'll cover the first two verses of it first. So the plague of blood from chapter 7, verse 14 and 15. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes out to the river. Confront him on the bank of the Nile, and take in your hand the staff that was changed into a snake. Now, before we continue, before we look at what's going to happen, let's just first look at where this is happening. Now, why meet Pharaoh there at the Nile? And this next plague, the plague of frogs, that happens at the Nile again. Two plagues, the Lord's doing this like double punch on the Nile. Why? Now, as we... maybe I'll give just a different example. We looked at it today, so it's in my mind. But in Isaiah 7, or later with Hezekiah, King Hezekiah, there's a siege coming. And Hezekiah puts his trust in an aqueduct. He goes, we're going to survive this.
day of calamity. We're going to survive this day of judgment. The Lord's sending them. Now we're going to survive it because we got this aqueduct. We got this source of water. And now that is, as Hezekiah puts his trust in it, the Lord and the Assyrian general both go, you shouldn't be doing that. That's not going to save you. That's not worth anything. And the Lord too, he's like, why are you trusting in that? Why not trust in the one who made water? Why not trust me? So it's a big thing that Hezekiah at that time and Israel at that time was trusting in this aqueduct, this source of was their God. And then here's another example in Ezekiel 29, and this is more relevant just to the Nile. In Ezekiel 29, Egypt and the Pharaoh of Egypt becomes, really, the Bible talks about him like he is a false god and this monster that lives in the Nile. And what the Lord's, this monster thinks he is a god. It's a false god. But the point is, this Nile is like the domain, kingdom of Egypt's gods. This is like their source of power, where if they control the Nile, everyone will know they control Egypt. They are these gods of Egypt if they control the Nile. So just to quickly cover, why does the Lord do these next two plagues against the Nile? It's what we mentioned with Aaron's staff. Do you remember? Where he's doing it, and he's really saying, the gods, I'm now fighting the gods. So for a minute, Pharaoh and Egypt, we'll come to you in a sec. I'm first going to beat your gods. That's what's really happening. These next two plagues, the Lord's like, you think this aqueduct, this river, this Nile, you think your gods control that? They don't. And he starts to expose it. Okay, what we do... Okay, there's a lot to cover in this plague of blood, and I've just seen time. So actually, let's just cover the rest of these two, plague of blood and plague of frogs, next week. And just a reminder that we're going to just cover them as this is the source of Egypt's gods. That's really who God's going to judge first. Just one sec, I'll cover the questions after. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay.
Let me just first close. So we'll cover the next plagues and we'll carry on week. But maybe if I can just perhaps pray for us, and then we'll close this week's Bible School show. So